Today we will be reading Chapter 5 of Treasure Island. Chapter 5, The Man on the Island. At first, Treasure Island seemed a fascinating place. There were marshes full of willows and odd, outlandish, swampy plants and trees. Here and there I saw snakes, and one raised its head from a rock and hissed at me with a noise not unlike that of a spinning top. I explored for a while until I wandered into a thicket of live oak trees, which grew along the sand. Suddenly, a wild duck flew up in the air, followed by another, and soon over the whole surface of the marsh, a great cloud of birds hung screaming and circling in the sky above us. I guessed that some of my shipmates must be drawing near. I listened and heard voices, faint but growing louder. I got down on all fours and crawled until I could see down into the little green dell beside the marsh, closely set about with trees. There, Long John Silver and a seaman named Tom stood face to face in a conversation. It was clear that Silver was testing Tom, trying to find out if he would join the mutiny. "I will not be led away," said Tom. "I'd sooner lose my hand. If I forget my duty—" All of a sudden, he was interrupted. Far away, out in the marsh, arose an angry roar, then another. Tom jumped at the sound like a horse pricked by a rider's spurs. But Silver winked not an eye. He stood resting lightly on his crutch, watching his companion, like a snake about to strike. "John," said Tom, "what was that?" "That?" said Silver with a treacherous smile. "Oh, I reckon that was Allen." Then Tom seemed to understand everything at once. "Allen!" he cried, fearing the worst for his friend. "Well, John Silver, you're no mate of mine, and that's a fact. I'll have no part in your mutiny." With that, the brave fellow turned his back on the cook and set off towards the beach. But he was not destined to go far. With a cry, Silver seized the branch of a tree, whipped the crutch from under his armpit, and sent the missile hurling through the air. It struck poor Tom right between the shoulders in the middle of his back. His hands flew up, and he let out a gasp and fell. I felt faint. The whole world seemed to swim before me in a whirling mist. When I gathered my courage to look again, I saw Silver standing next to Tom, who was motionless on the ground. A moment later, Silver pulled out a whistle and blew upon it. I guessed he was calling the other pirates, and I was worried they might find me. I crawled out of the undergrowth and ran as fast as I could. It was all over for me, I thought. I would be captured by the mutineers. So why do you think that the author took the time to tell about the interaction between Long John Silver and this seaman named Tom? Well, it's probably because they want you to know that Long John Silver is planning to lead a mutiny, and he's also willing to hurt anybody that doesn't join the mutiny. I ran without knowing where I was going until a new alarm brought me to a standstill. With a thumping heart, I saw a dark, shaggy figure leap from behind a tree trunk. Was it a bear or a monkey? I could not tell, but I was afraid because I was now cut off on both sides. Behind me were the ferocious pirates, and in front of me, the lurking creature. The figure flitted from trunk to trunk like a deer, but it ran on two legs like a man. I was tempted to cry for help when another sighting reassured me that the creature was indeed a man. I took some comfort in this discovery, and in the fact that I had just remembered I had carried my pistol in my pocket. I put one hand on my pistol and took a few steps forward. At that precise moment, the man leapt out of the open and threw himself on his knees and held out his hands as if begging for mercy. I could see that he was an Englishman like myself, but his clothes were old and tattered, and his skin had been burned by the sun. In fact, his bright eyes looked quite startling on a face so burned. "Who are you?" I demanded. "I'm Ben Gunn, I am," he replied. His voice sounded like a rusty lock. "I haven't spoken with a man for 3 years. I am surprised I still know how to speak." "3 years?" I cried. "Were you shipwrecked here?" Nay, friend, he said. I was marooned. I had heard the word, and I knew it stood for a horrible kind of punishment common enough among buccaneers. It was my understanding that when a person is marooned, he is abandoned on a desolate island with not much to rely on other than his wits. Marooned 3 years ago, continued the man. I've lived on goats, berries, and oysters, but my heart longs for English food. At night, I dream of cheese. All this time, he had been looking at me and smiling. He seemed to take a childish pleasure in the presence of a fellow creature. What is your name? He asked. Jim Hawkins, I told him. Well, now, Jim, he said, if I ever get back to England, I'm changing my ways and the company I keep. I'm a changed man. So, what do you think that Ben Gunn meant when he said, if I ever get back to England, I'm changing my ways and the company I keep? Well, if you think about it, Ben Gunn was obviously a pirate until another group of pirates marooned him on the island. And if he says he's going to change his ways, well, he probably means that he's going to stop being a buccaneer or a pirate. And if he says he's going to change the company he keeps, that probably means he's not going to associate with pirates anymore. And Jim, he continued, looking around and lowering his voice to low more than a whisper. I'm rich. You'll thank your lucky stars, you will, that you was the first that found me. Then a shadow passed over his face, and he took a hold of my hand and raised one finger threateningly before my eyes. Now, Jim, he said, tell me true. Is that Flint ship you came on? No, I replied. It's not Flint's ship. Flint is dead. But we have some of his men with us. Not a man with one leg, he gasped. John Silver? I asked. Yes, that were his name, he said anxiously. After talking with Ben Gunn for a few minutes, I no longer feared him. In fact, I told him the story of our voyage, and he heard it with the keenest of interest. Well, he said, you and your friends are in a pinch, ain't you? Well, never you mind. Just put your trust in Ben Gunn. But tell me one thing. Is this squire of yours an honest man? Yes, I said. Suppose I gave him a share of my money. Do you think he would let me sail home with you? He asked. I'm sure he would, I replied. He seemed greatly relieved to hear this. Well, then, he went on, I'll tell you my story. I was on Flint's ship when he buried his treasure. He went ashore on this very island with 6 strong men. They were ashore nearly a week and left the rest of us on the ship. Eventually, Flint came back, all by himself. There he was. And the 6 men, all dead. How he done it, not a man on board could make out. Billy Bones was the mate back then, and Silver was also part of the crew. Then, 3 years back, I was on another ship, and we sighted this island. Boys, said I, this is where Flint buried his treasure. Let's go ashore and find it. 12 days we spent looking for it. Then the others gave up and went back aboard. As for you, Benjamin Gunn, says they, here's a musket and a spade and a pickaxe. You can stay here and find Flint's money for yourself. Well, Jim, that's my story. Now be a good lad and run and speak with the squire. Tell him I know this island like it's my own. How am I to get back to the ship? I asked. You can use my boat, he said.
I made it with my own 2 hands. I keep it under a white rock along the shore."
Then, quite suddenly, we heard the boom of a cannon. "They've begun to fight!" I cried. We stayed together in the undergrowth, unaware of time passing, listening to the sound of the cannon and the pistol fire. Eventually, I decided I should make my way towards the anchorage. Ben agreed to accompany me. At some point along the way, we spotted a Union Jack fluttering above the trees. And remember, a Union Jack is the official flag of Great Britain.
"That must be your friends,"
said Ben Gunn. "It can't be," I said, stunned by the sight of the flag. "They're on the ship. That must be Silver or some of the other mutineers." So when Jim Hawkins and Ben Gunn see the Union Jack, why do you think Ben Gunn says, "That must be your friends"? Well, it's probably because Jim Hawkins and his fellow shipmates are British. And because the Union Jack is a British flag, it would make sense that an Englishman would fly it because England is part of Great Britain. Pirates do not often fly the flags of their homelands. They often fly the Jolly Roger. And the Jolly Roger is the unofficial flag of pirates, featuring a skull and crossbones on a black background.
"That must be your friends,"
said Ben Gunn. "It can't be," I said, stunned by the sight of the flag. "They're on the ship. That must be Silver and some of the other mutineers."
"Not likely," said Ben Gunn. "In a place like this, where nobody puts in but gentlemen of fortune, Silver would fly the Jolly Roger. You see, Jim, just over that hill is an old stockade. Flint built it many years ago. I reckon that your friends have retreated to the stockade, and Silver has the ship."
"Well," I said, "if it really is them, I should try to help."
"I'll not go with you," said Ben Gunn, "not till I have an opportunity to meet with the squire in private. If he wants to talk, tell him where he can find me and to come with a white flag to show he means well."
At that moment, a cannonball came whizzing through the trees and tore up the sand, not 100 yards from us. I ran one way and Ben Gunn ran another. After parting with Ben Gunn, I decided to assess the situation. First, I went to check on the Española. I saw that she was still anchored in the same place, but now she was flying the Jolly Roger. It seemed that the pirates had indeed taken over the ship. Next, I scouted the shoreline. I spotted a big white rock, and I figured it must be the rock beneath which Ben Gunn hid his boat. Then I made my way through the woods until I came to the stockade, a plain log house surrounded by a tall fence. I saw that Ben Gunn had been right. My friends were in the stockade with the Union Jack flying above them. So a stockade probably looks a little bit like this one in the picture, because on an uninhabited island like the one on which Captain Flint buried his treasure, a stockade was usually built by staking tall wooden fence posts into the ground, providing a structure for protection or capture. In Treasure Island, the stockade provided a barrier to slow down the mutinous attacks. Similar forts could have been used to hold prisoners as well. I called out to them and was warmly welcomed. They told me their story, and I told them mine. When fighting broke out on the ship, they had decided that they would be safer on the island, so they escaped in 2 of the landing boats with some guns and supplies. They had heard about the stockade. When the pirates saw them rowing away, they fired on them from the ship and then attacked the stockade. Old Red Ruth had been killed, and another one of our loyal men, Gray, had been injured. After telling my story, I had the chance to look about me. The stockade was made of trunks of pine. Near the door of the stockade was a little spring that welled up and provided fresh water. There was a small chimney in the roof, through only which a little smoke found its way out. The rest stayed in the house and kept us coughing. If we had been allowed to sit idle, we should have all fallen into the blues. But Captain Smollett divided us into watches. The doctor questioned me about Ben Gunn. "Do you think he's sane, Jim?" I'm not quite sure. He seems a little strange.
Well, said the doctor, you can't expect a man who has spent 3 years on a deserted island to be as clear-minded as you or me.
We had very little in the way of supplies, and the captain was worried. He thought our best hope was to get the better of the buccaneers. They had lost 4 men, and 2 others were wounded. So, based upon what we've read, would you characterize the buccaneers or the pirates as trustworthy or not trustworthy? And why? I mean, I would have to say that the Buccaneers are not trustworthy people. I mean, they lie, they steal, they treat each other poorly. I mean, they marooned Ben Gunn on an island for 3 years all by himself. I mean, a loyal person would never do that to you. So be thinking about how the Buccaneers treat one another and the actions that they show because of how they treat each other. And that's where we're going to stop for today.